Bam.
This is Mike Cote, and you're watching the Break It Down Show.
Sometimes the most obvious guests are the ones that are like right in front of your fucking face, Pete. And so you and I are part of a group that we do like an email, very, very smart people who discuss complex topics. And then it turned out we interact more on X than we do on that platform. And it just had never occurred to me to have you on to talk about foreign policy, etc. So apologies for being so late to the party, but
No
thrilled
worries.
to talk to you today.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
I guess for folks who don't know you, maybe give a little bit of a background, some bona fides, and then let's just dig in and get nasty with whatever part of foreign policy we want to discuss.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Mike Cote, like I mentioned. I am a writer and historian. I write at rationalpolicy.com. That's my own website. I've written for a few other publications as well, mostly on the conservative side of the aisle. National Review is probably the most well-known, but I've had pieces over at Providence Magazine and Commentary as well. I focus a lot on diplomacy, military history, obviously geopolitics and foreign policy as well. So those are kind of where I'm mostly focused. This is a second career for me. I used to be a CPA and auditor, so much better career now. I'm enjoying it a lot more. But I'll try to take that the kind of things that I learned in that previous career, both in terms of economic understanding as well as just a general skepticism towards new information, and bring that to my work now as well.
Yeah, I mean that's thanks for stealing the first question from me because that's exactly what I want you to do. When you have other experiences and then you come to evaluate state and policy, it's informative because you're like, hey, if this worked here and was the norm here, why is it completely ignored over here? Or why would this not work? And you think the same thing's gonna, and so there's a lot of that kind of thing. And accounting must come in handy as you look to balance the ledger.
Yeah, no, definitely. And it's one of those things where you kind of get some information from that, just some understanding of how the private sector operates. Being an auditor, I had a ton of different clients in all different sorts of fields. So you have to learn a lot about their businesses to be able to do a and I kind of try to take that learning about, different topics, geopolitics, things like that, and try to take it from there and kind of think, all right, if I'm coming into this without any sort of background, pretending like I don't, if I don't have anything, just kind of think, hey, all right, does this make sense? How can this work? And one thing that's very, very helpful, I think, having an accounting background is just understanding numbers, especially large numbers. I feel like a lot of people just generally, I mean, not their fault at all. It's kind of difficult to comprehend the difference between a million and a billion or a billion and a trillion. And just kind of general skepticism about facts and figures and statistics, unless they're really well backed. I think that can be really helpful, especially when you're talking about foreign policy and things like that. You get lots of breathless predictions of, this many people are going to die if this happens. And, you kind of just think about it for a minute. You're like, well, does that actually make any logical sense when we're actually talking numbers? And usually it doesn't. So it's one of those things where coming into that with that skepticism and that understanding of, how numbers work, especially larger numbers, that can be kind of overwhelming for people. I think that's really helpful in times of just grounding you.
We see quite a bit of that breathlessness amplified in the press. And so they'll see that number and say, wow, hundreds of thousands of people dying, whatever it is, or, whatever the catastrophe is, right? If it bleeds, it leads. That's always a good example. And when the press carries water for something like Department of State, because of an ideological, I'll say taint, maybe less than a taint, maybe that's more fair, but maybe not. Certainly a regional tilt. Most Department of State people end up in one part of the country and or are from that part of the country, which I think creates problems in and of itself, because if you have someone who is a Mountain West type person versus someone who is blue-blooded or goes to Ivy League or any of those things, you're going to get a different approach to things, because Pete would say, if you can quickly point to Durango, Colorado on a map and have ever met anybody there, you have a better understanding of most of the nation just for that one simple test than most people on the Northeast corridor. Doesn't make them bad people, but they have a history, they have a type, and they have a performance that we can look at Department of State and say, hey, the accounting here seems a little bit off.
Yeah, and it's one of those things. I mean, I'm from New Jersey originally, so I moved out to Colorado last year. And just being,
I didn't even do that on purpose.
It's very funny because it's one of those things where if you don't come into it with an openness to understanding different people and
Yeah.
acknowledge that, hey, people around the country, even in the United States, we have such a huge country and so many different cultures and regional differences. That if you come into it with an open mind, believing that, hey, everyone has something to say and something that's worth listening to, I think that is very, very helpful. And unfortunately, being in the New York City, basically, finance scene, you don't get a lot of that. I went to college up in Boston, very, very similar. You don't really get much of that either. So it's one of those things where even just driving across the country to move out here opens eyes in a way that is completely
Yeah.
different. And just having that openness to new experience, especially with people who may not agree with you or just have a different life experience. I think that's something that a lot of folks, especially in DC, could learn a lot from because unfortunately, even when you have representatives and things like that from all around the country, oftentimes they are really more similar to each other than they are representative of the people that they're actually supposed to be representing.
Yeah, and just to soften that blow, it's fine to play in that blue blood northeastern world and graduate up there in terms of influence and power and success. It's totally fine to do that, but it does limit your access to who people are. And
Yeah.
and you can work hard to do that and create that balance. But my experience is that it becomes all consuming. If you go to a party in DC, this is just a funny thing, and just for people to understand, it's a great way to explain this. A friend gave me this. DC is Hollywood for smart people. He said ugly people. I'm just going to be a little nicer. But you go there and someone's like, "Yeah, hey, what's going on? What's your name? What do you do? Yeah, okay, I gotta go." And then they like, you're like, you didn't even meet me. You
Yeah.
look past
Yeah.
me. I've been looked past like so many times in DC. And I'm like, hey, yeah, no worries. Go do your thing. Go be that. Go talk to the next person. I know, and it's fine. But when you see that caricature that I've just talked about personified in a combat zone where state or USAID is trying to perform, that takes my spy sense and I go, I've detected a problem that's worth
Mhm.
looking into. And the boss wants to know about things that are causing trouble for the mission. That's just a basic requirement, right? And you don't think of it as being state or the person working on rule of law, in a combat zone. You don't think about those people as being destabilizers. But my rule is, and this just comes from a lot of experience and a lot of people I've interacted with in a lot of different places, that the U.S. is a net destabilizer wherever they go. We struggle to create a lasting durable, stable platform for people to live on.
Yeah, and I think unfortunately, I mean, there are some times that you want to destabilize other countries, but unfortunately, we're not destabilizing the right countries. We're doing that to the wrong countries, and that's one of the bigger problems. It's one of those things
Yeah.
where you need to focus if you're going to be working for the federal government and trying to, especially in foreign policy, where your job is basically to represent the U.S. abroad, and not only
Mm-hmm.
just our culture or whatnot, but to represent our hard nosed interests. Right? These are things that are not necessarily changing. They're durable. We have an interest in freedom of navigation, freedom of trade, generally peace on the world stage, and obviously you don't always get those things, but you need to focus on that kind of stuff instead of focusing on all the tangential, tertiary, whatever kind of stuff that we end up focusing the vast majority of our stuff on, at least since the end of the Cold War. It's one of those things where I think we've lost a step, and unfortunately, I think part of that is due to like you were talking about, the types of people who end up getting recruited, kind of all being from the same milieu culturally, and also just having the same general operative beliefs. If you come in there as an outsider with, you don't have a Johns Hopkins degree in international studies, you didn't go to Georgetown, etc. Um, these are kind of things that are status markers more so than anything else. But if anything,
Yeah.
they put you in a frame of mind that is pretty myopic, and it doesn't really allow you to take in the breadth of understanding what the world is actually like.
Yeah. I mean, that's the breadth of it and the depth, I guess you have to throw in there too.
Mm-hmm.
If you never leave the palace, I call it the spaceship. This is, I think, the best way to look at this. If you're up on the Star Trek Enterprise and then you're trying to make decisions for a farmer on the ground, uh, it's really tough. You got to
Mm-hmm.
have an awakening to go down, and they have to be able to see the thing that's in front of them. And this is where I developed particular professional skills. Was I call it miscomfort. I can go to another place where I don't understand the culture and I can navigate in that. Even though it's uncomfortable, everything looks weird, I have built up the professional skill set to say this is all normal to them. How do I understand what normal looks like so I can communicate that back? When we send people out and they are another group, where if I see someone from the Kennedy School of Government in the wild in a place like Zabul province, Afghanistan, I'm like, aha, I have found the problem. This
Yep.
person doesn't understand what it's like to be an Afghan farmer. He wants to improve. And this taught me the saying that I'm going to say. This is my saying. But you cannot presume to improve the condition of the person thing that you're interested in improving if you refuse to understand the condition of that person or thing.
Yeah, no,
And
that's 100% right.
yeah, and we can't be bothered because they're not in the palace. And so now you're dealing with political intrigue, and maybe there's some room for that as well. But don't presume to know how to improve someone else's life if you can't be bothered to understand it.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things, and I encounter this all the time with my historical work. People wanting to take their own understanding of the present and pretend that that's how people in the past understood themselves, and it's very similar. It's not. It's it's almost a narcissism in a way, and kind of believing that this is the culture that I'm from. This is the way that things always should be, and not really having that humility to understand. Hey, other people may think differently. They may live differently, and if you don't actually understand that, then you don't really have any way of actually, benefiting them or even just understanding the situation in a way that allows you to advance American interests. In terms of history, people always, it's presentism basically. People are looking back on the past and they're making judgments, but they're not putting themselves in those shoes. They're basically saying, hey, I'm from 2025 and I'm pretending that I'm in 1725 and human nature is not really changing. So I firmly believe that. But culture, the way people think, the belief systems, the way that different things interact with each other, those are all different. They change all the time. And one thing you see that a lot with is with religion. If you look back in the past, there are these wars of religion that happened. And oftentimes you'll get modern historians, especially progressive historians, that are saying, hey, this is really about economics or social class or things like that. And sure, that plays a role, that nothing is monocausal. But if you actually look back at what these people wrote and what they said, you got to believe them. They weren't just trying to lie to themselves. If they're writing letters to their friends or writing their own diaries, they're writing what they actually believed. And unless you actually try to go in and understand them on their own terms, you're going to miss the forest for the trees.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot there, and we could dive into that quite a bit. But I want to play with more of a survey still as we talk about these things. Administrations, Trump caveat here. I'm not a Trump guy, right? But he is the president. And just like Joe Biden was a president, just like Trump was a president, just like Obama was a president, these guys are charged with making decisions and changing and improving or whatever they want to do with the government. They're the boss. And so right now we have a current administration that says, hey, the State Department needs pruning. We don't like where they're at. We think there's money being wasted. And along with that, USAID. Now, I agree with all of that. And this is not a political thing. It's just a fact. Like, we've gone out and we've spent a lot of money and don't frankly care where the money goes. Like, yeah, we know that we're going to buy this grain and it's going to end up in the hand of these warlords. It doesn't really matter. As long as the money goes in, the problems will take care of themselves, which is a really fucked up way to look at how other people live their lives.
No, totally. And it's again, it's doing one of those things where they're trying to forward their own interests in a way. You're putting money in the pockets of different NGOs that do this sort of work. Obviously, they take their own cut. Depending on the NGO, some are bigger than others. Some take a bigger cut. Some actually give more of the aid to the people they're supposed to be giving it to. But when you're outsourcing all that to people who are not necessarily aligned with the same vision that you're supposed to be aligned with, and for the most part, I feel like NGOs are kind of unmoored from American national interest, which again, that's not their job. For the most part, their job is dispersing aid or whatever they're doing in terms of their specific capacity. But if you're at State Department or USAID, your job has to be forwarding America's national interests and really focusing like a laser on that. And unfortunately, we've drifted so far away from that core mission that it is almost unrecognizable from even 30 so years ago.
Yeah, boy, again, you've said a lot there that we could dig into. One of the challenges, this will go to your accounting heart for sure, is that we have a budget. We must spend that budget. I don't really care about the results. My job is to spend this $30 million on schools that I'm going to leave. That is my job. And if they do that, they get thumbs up and promoted. And I'm just using the military side, it's State Department, whoever it is, and you watch these people that have this litany of bad runs, bad decisions, bad careers, and they're like, I now work at, and I really learned to loathe this place, but I now work at the Atlantic Council, helping
Mhm.
people understand what we ought to do. And you're like, wait, have you guys seen your role of people who feed that place? Like, come on, man. And so this is one of the reasons why I'm so critical of how we handle the State Department and why I don't mind President Trump, taking some folks out. We get fed a lot of nonsense that may or may not be in our interests, and when it's wrong or when they fail, there's never accountability. Zero,
No,
zero, zero,
no.
zero accountability. So I don't mind if some State Department, even some good people, get fired. It's a broken system right now, and I don't think that it hurts them to have to get lean and figure it out again.
Yeah, no, it's definitely one of those things. I mean, having experience in the private sector, you realize that there is really very little accountability at all in government. Like you said, the metrics are all messed up. You have, hey, we need to get this money out the door. You spent the money, great. Well, that's not helpful. What's the purpose of the money? And I think at this
Right.
point, there's some just inertia there where bureaucracy is just going to move on the way it moves on, and you obviously need to take that into account when you're dealing with anything like that. But it's one of those things where you don't really want to play into that or lean into that more than you need to, and we've gone way too far in that direction. And it's one of those things, again, like you look at a company that's failing, it's going bankrupt, they need to change things around. Yeah, they're going to cut staff. Sometimes those are good workers, but you got to cut the staff regardless because you need to turn a profit. And we're not really worried about turning a profit. I mean, again, the government's not meant to turn a profit exactly, but if the goal, if you're going to analogize to a private company, if the goal is going to be, hey, we need to improve our standing in X, Y, or Z country, we need to focus on that, get measurable, attainable goals, and we're not doing any of that. And I think part of that is Congress. I mean, Congress has really been sitting on its hands for years and years now, not really putting these people that work for these organizations to the fire. And I'm glad, like you said, I'm also not really a Trump guy. I'm a kind of classical conservative Reaganite. So
Right.
he, rubs me the wrong way on a lot of stuff, especially economics. But
Yeah.
when it comes to foreign policy, this has not been pretty bad so far. I've been pretty pleased with it. And with respect to this particular issue, cutting state and USAID, I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, if you just
Yeah.
look at headcounts, Department of State has 80,000 employees, which is completely insane. If you look at most of my graduate work in history was on the British Empire, particularly in the Victorian, Edwardian eras before World War One. And if you look at the British Foreign Office during that time, which essentially was running, about a third of the world, they had about 500 full-time employees in London. And obviously, you had more people on site in the colonies and across the world, embassies, things like that. But even then, overall, they probably had about 10,000 people max. And that includes locals that they hire, things like that. And obviously, the world right now is more complicated. There are way more countries than there were in 1914. But, we don't dominate the world like Britain did back then. And we have just an insanely increased number of people that are trying to help us do this goal of, pushing American interests, kind of retaining as much primacy
Right.
as we can. And the headcount is just completely at odds with the efficiency and effectiveness of the organization.
There's a mechanical part of the State Department that we all need to work. And those are the folks that, and I don't want to diminish their role, they have very important roles, but they are not involved in the foreign policy per se. They are involved in, oh shit, I am in trouble in Algeria, help. And then you
Yep.
come in and they're your advocate. Now you're talking about the US and protecting a citizen. I don't think either of us are talking about that. If
No.
you need a passport reissue because yours got stolen, we want that capability. That doesn't take 80,000 people to
No.
do that. It takes more than we probably realize. And I'm using passports and some legal trouble as the example. There's a whole litany of anywhere there's an American, there needs to be a consulate and some kind of State Department resource to help
Mhm.
you in case you need help. Right? That is part of what I think we all want the State Department to do. It's when we get outside of that realm and we get into the, hey, let's have some non-attributional messaging with these weapons as we send them out to stabilize this area and depower this warlord over here. That's when it gets tricky, and that's when it slides quickly into the bullshit side of things.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I mean, even that part that you were talking about that's necessary and important, we mess that up all the time too. I mean, just look at the way we left Afghanistan, right? You
Yeah,
had probably hundreds of Americans that were stranded there at first. Obviously, the Biden administration was really not at all forthcoming about that, which was a
right,
huge problem. But again,
right.
that's one of those core competencies that you really can't mess up, and we're not focusing enough on that, and we're focusing way too much on all the messaging stuff. And messaging, I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm a diplomatic historian. Diplomacy, messaging, super duper important, especially in foreign policy. The things that you say matter, but you can't just say things. You need to do things as well. And unfortunately, I think we've kind of gotten way too obsessed with the talking and the hey, make plans to talk
Yeah.
to somebody else, and not actually, well, what's the purpose of that? Why are you having this meeting to do this? Or is the point of the meeting just to have the meeting, or is it actually to try to negotiate some sort of settlement that's going to be beneficial for the country?
I had a chat with General Stanley McChrystal the other day, Stan, my buddy Stan, and one of the examples he uses, because he's the ultimate boss in Afghanistan at the time, and he has to go sit in front of Karzai and say, "Hey, we killed this guy, and probably maybe shouldn't have. We're not really sure. Take a look at the video." And Karzai looks at the video, and there's a guy, a farmer, sure enough, digging in the ground at 2 a.m. Well, that guy's putting an IED in place. And Karzai's like, "No, he's doing the irrigation work, and he had his time, and his time opened at 2 o'clock in the morning, and he opens up and it's just 100%. I've seen all this.
Yeah.
There's all kinds of crazy things that happen with irrigation in Afghanistan. And because we refuse to understand that, we killed the wrong person.
Mm-hmm.
And now we put a weight on our partner's back that he didn't need,
Yep.
because he's trying to do what he's trying to do. And look, sometimes these guys are corrupt, but let's not ever forget, we are the corruption. We are the corrupting force. So whenever I heard, oh, yeah, they're corrupt, and I'm like, motherfucker, how much money have we thrown around in this place to
Yeah.
corrupt their system? And it's just, as the second corruption leaves someone's mouth, I know that there's a problem with us because we don't understand this. And I want to say one other thing to kind of, this is not soapboxy, but it's going to get close. When we were talking earlier about the changes that we like to see in our image, like we'd like the women to have more power. And I'm published on female empowerment and how I don't think it was the right thing to do, not because I hate women, but because I love women. The timing of these things, women got the right to vote well after we became a nation.
Mm-hmm.
We secured civil rights for black folks well after the 1920s. And so it takes time to do all of these changes, whether it's this change or that change. We get really precious with what people should have done in that time. But the factor is we're trying to also not get into a war. So I'll use baseball because it has nothing to do with foreign policy. When we see Jackie Robinson in 1947, there's actually a number of barriers that had to be broken, but that was the first big one. It's easy to be like, oh, well, they should have done that 25 years before. Well, you got a lot of interests competing, and there's power, and there's money, and people are afraid of it. And so it's less about the social side of it, and it's more about how do we manage all of these problems. If I run an In-N-Out burger, and like, hey, we're switching to all vegan burgers tomorrow. Well, that's going to be dangerous to my business. Maybe it works out. Maybe it doesn't. I don't know. But you don't just get to say, hey, you should have just made that change right away, because that's not how things work. That's what we do to other places. We say, hey, now is the time for women astronauts. And the women are like, we don't want to be astronauts. It's not in our interests. We don't care. And so we put ourselves into their world and create a problem that they didn't ask for. And then we tell them what the solution is going to be. And it makes no sense to them culturally.
Yeah, and I think that's one of those things that I mean, this is a general trend in society that there's a lot of short-term thinking, there's a lot of immediacy bias. Something needs to happen right away or it doesn't work, and that's just not how geopolitics works. If you're talking to someone, especially on the left, you'll get, oh, we shouldn't be friends with the Saudis or whatever because they're evil and they do bad things to their population, and that's not great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not a big fan of human rights abuses like that, but if you're trying to figure out how do we advance American interests in this region, you work with the people you have. I mean, if you look back, we were friends with Taiwan and South Korea when they were both essentially dictatorships, military dictatorships in the case of both.
Right.
South Korea, after the Korean War, was a military dictatorship for about almost 30 years before that was really overthrown by a popular revolution. And it was less a revolution than it was a reform movement. And that reform movement happened because America was there. We were helping South Korea remain stable and safe. And we didn't tell them, you need to become a democracy tomorrow. We kind of led them in that direction. We helped them develop. And then when they were ready, they become a democracy. And don't get me wrong, they're a bit of a mess. If you look at the number of South Korean leaders that have been in jail, it's more than you'd like, but it's more perfect than it would have been otherwise. And I think that's one of those things that we kind of miss a lot now, where if a country is not perfect, we can't be friends with them, or we can't, use them to help us advance shared interests. And I think that's just really counterproductive. I mean, if you look at just the way Saudi Arabia has changed in the past 10 years or so, it's significant. It's not perfect. It's not changing tomorrow, but it's moving the right direction. And America has always been such a beacon of, human rights, freedom, liberty. That's great. We should continue to be that. But we shouldn't try to pretend that these other countries are going to turn into America tomorrow, because that's just not going to happen. Right. We didn't turn into America in one day.
They don't need to want to do that either. They might say, hey, this is how we do things here. You're not going to tell the French what to do. The French are going to do it the French way, and that's fine. And I would also say this too, because anytime we hear these kind of things like, hey, there's more Korean leaders, elected leaders in jail than we're comfortable with, we just simply don't put our leaders in jail.
That's true.
I mean,
unless you're in New York or New Jersey,
Well, I mean, and right now there's a legitimate question about the Obama presidency and what they did with Russia collusion. And again, I'm not a Trump guy, but when he stands up and says they spied on my campaign, and we all laugh, oh wait, they really did that. Oh, and it goes all the way to the top. Oh, yeah. Or when, and look, I'm just going to be honest about this, and I'm going to use them as an example. But when Bill Clinton gets on, I mean, it's even just saying it is ridiculous. He gets on Loretta Lynch's plane, if you guys don't know about this. And they just talk about grandkid shit. Well, if my wife is being deposed by the FBI about obvious and admitted leaks of classified information, on that day, I'm not going anywhere near Loretta Lynch's airplane, because I don't want to give the perception that I'm trying to influence anything. And anybody wants to go look, you can see the polling that day, boop, dropped down, and she never recovered that hit and ultimately loses. I'm not going to say that was the only reason. I was going to vote for Hillary. I did not vote for Donald Trump. I was going to vote for Hillary Clinton. I was going to hold my nose and do it because I really don't like Donald Trump. And that I could not in good conscience support that, because I know what it is to protect classified. And this isn't about what Pete needs and everything. I'm just explaining like when I saw that, and when I saw her State Department, and when I saw all of these things, and I'm like, why am I even considering this? And by the way, Roger Clinton's a friend of mine. It's Bill's brother. And so I would say this stuff to his face. Like, I saw too much corruption. I saw too much arrogance. I saw too much ignorance. Then that I couldn't take her being president, at least by my vote. And I don't know what to do about Donald Trump. But this whole thing goes into the State Department thing. When you have people that can't be the dumbest person in the room, that know more because they took a class their fifth year, in their first year of grad school at Georgetown. And I've met these people. You can't be part of the solution. The amount of ill-principled behavior in our leader class, in our Diplo class, is shocking. And I've tried to start an organization. These things are very hard to start, apparently. I thought it was going to be easy at first, but it became very hard. But the ill-principled behavior, the dismissal of things that matter, like folks like me on the ground, like, hey, this isn't working. You're asking me how many schools in the area. How about how many schools are hulks that aren't being used as schools that were built shoddily? Would that interest you? And then what the fuck are we going to do about it? Not a goddamn thing. Build more schools, right? And so we became a school building machine rather than a educating machine who got kids educated in a way that made more sense.
Yeah, and that kind of reminds me of for example, China, right? They build cities all over the place, and people look at them from the outside and like, oh wow, look at all these amazing buildings of this big city they just built. Nobody lives there. It loses tons of money. It's useless and meaningless. It's built like crap. And it's for an audience that is not actually interested in the reality on the ground. And when you feel like you're smarter than everyone else, like everything else, and you kind of ignore the people that have different experiences than you and might be more salient experiences, right? If you're on the ground in Afghanistan and you're looking at these schools being built, That's much better than someone in Washington that just gets the facts and figures or pictures. They don't have
Yeah.
that information. They don't have that knowledge base. And unfortunately, far too many people just tend to ignore folks that are actually there, on the ground doing things and saying, hey, this is helpful, this is not helpful. And if we did more of that and understood more of those people, we'd probably be much more effective in terms of our foreign aid. And don't get me wrong,
Yeah.
I think foreign aid is very important for American soft power abroad. It's super important, but it's really important as to what you spend it on. When you have something like the PEPFAR program that helps AIDS in Africa, that's been highly successful, not only in saving lives, but in actually, building healthcare infrastructure and promoting, America as a country that is there to help. Same thing with disaster relief. If we go out and help earthquake victims, tsunami victims, we're very good at that sort of thing, at disaster recovery and relief. And sending that and exporting that is helpful. We used to build a lot more infrastructure than we do now as terms of our foreign aid. And China's been doing that like crazy. And they're getting success out of it, even though they're not doing a very good job out of it. And they're, really making it super pro-China in terms of the debt and all that kind of stuff that they use. But, we have the ability to get more in this game and spend the money that Congress has appropriated in a way that's much more effective. But unfortunately, I think, it's two sides of the same coin, right? You have the folks that say, well, none of that stuff's important. We need to just do progressive messaging. Fly the pride flag in our Ugandan embassy. Just meaningless. Right. If anything, not even, it's counterproductive because that's going to alienate large swaths of the society.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And, but then you have folks that say we shouldn't be giving any money to foreign aid. And I think it's kind of, you got to strike that balance where it's, we do that. We give the money to foreign aid, but we spend it in the right places. And, I'm glad that Trump is doing what he's doing because I think it's going to have some sort of reorientation of that. It's going to take a lot more work. He's only got 4 years of his term. He's term limited. Sure. We'll see who the next president is, but it's one of those things where once you start that ball rolling, you got to kind of keep it going. And if you do, it eventually builds a momentum of its own. And hopefully, 10 years or so from now, we have a much better, much more functional, much more effective State Department than we do today. So we'll see what happens.
For folks who get worried about Donald Trump and his lacing of the State Department and putting USAID underneath, we all know that mission creep happens. And let me just tell you, these organizations have a lot of mission creep. So just on that factor alone, I think it's okay to do some pruning. One of the hallmarks of USAID and State Department things, and again, these are things just born out of direct experience with these folks, is it always briefs better than what actually happens. And so when they being state and USAID, when they say, oh, there's this program in Village X, woohoo, wow. Well, I'll go to Village X if it's in my area. I don't take field trips to other people's areas, but I go to my area and I look at it and I go there when they're not there. I go there when the Army's not there and I see what's really happening. And guess what? It's never what they brief. It never is. And so when they say, oh my God, 100,000 people are going to die, you're going to have to prove that.
Yeah.
And that means you have to get field capable, leave your cushy seat, risk your job by having bad news when you come back and go out and do the fucking work. And they refuse to do that work over and over and over again. It's not what they do. It's ultimately the answer.
No, and so it's one of those things they rely on, studies and things like that. People saying, hey, we're looking at this and we're projecting this many deaths. But hey, go there in person, like you said. Figure it out. Talk to the people on the ground. It's not easy collecting statistics like that. It's very easy for someone to make a projection using some sort of modeling software. Again, just going back to my accounting experience, you have your projections in the beginning of the year for what your revenues and stuff are going to be. And then reality smacks you in the face. And if you just pretend that your projections are the only thing that matters, then everything looks peachy keen until you go bankrupt. And it's one of those things where you actually need to collect the data. And that's hard. And these folks don't always seem like they like doing difficult things that may not comport with their priors.
Yeah. Well, one of the problems that State Department and USAID have is they have what I call an orientation ladder problem. So they're all climbing a ladder, which means they're looking up at the next person's ass. And that's all they see. Meanwhile, all the work is on the ground level, and they have no time for that. And so you'll hear the most preposterous conversations where they'll say something like, I don't care what governor from country X has to say. The ambassador wants this. Okay, well, it's like you might hear from an officer. I don't care what this governor has to say. My boss wants this. Like, okay, well, this is where the problem starts, because you don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because we won't do that work to look into it, it's very hard. In theory, someone like me could work for Stan McChrystal and help him drive all of his provinces and district assets better, right? But the ability to have that connection to the 4-star down to a captain, that bridge is too long and it breaks. And so either I'll be too comfortable living at the Hotel International and I'll find work for myself at Bagram or in Kandahar, so I don't have to go out into the hinterland, or I'm limited on movement, or whatever all these things are. And all of a sudden that line, that game of telephone, becomes more compartmentalized. And I've seen what happens, and this is just me. So State Department cables, whatever it's going to be, same thing, where you'll write something profound. Hey, this is important. Pay attention. And then they'll take this line out and this line above that part, and they'll go and they'll put them together. And like, I wrote those 20 words, but they weren't in order. And that's not what I wrote. You've changed the nature of it, because they can't understand the language I'm speaking, even though I'm trying to speak to all these multiple stacked audiences. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Mike?
Yeah, no, totally. It definitely does. And it's one of those things where nowadays we have such ease of communication, and there are very few barriers to direct communication if it's something that in terms of technology, right? If you were back in 1975 and you were posted abroad, it'd be a lot harder to get in touch with people and send that information up the chain in a way that was meaningful. We have crazy amounts of media. The internet, it's connecting everyone in a way that's brand new, and it's incredibly powerful. But the problem is it doesn't seem like we use that. It seems like we're still stuck in that hierarchical mode where, you pass it up the ladder to the next person, to the next person. It's like a game of telephone and it never works out.
Right.
But we don't have to play that game of telephone anymore. We have the ability to gather that information, to show it to people, to talk directly to people that are multiple rungs on the ladder above you or below you. And I think it's a matter of will to actually do that. And unfortunately, you don't always have that will, especially in diplomacy. You have people that, I'm just going to report to my supervisor and that's it. I don't want to rock the boat. I'm just going to go along. And when everyone, like we were talking about earlier, is from the same background, that same cultural milieu, that same ideology, you get groupthink, whether you want it or not. You need people that are willing to take risks, that are willing to go out there and say things that may not be popular. Those are the kind of people you want to retain and keep on. They can rock the boat. They may be more difficult to work with sometimes, but you're going to get the straight answer from them. And if you're doing something as important as foreign policy, you need that.
Yeah. It is you're explaining a very complex thing. And as you're explaining it, what folks probably are going to not get immediately, and I'm going to try to communicate, is that applies in every single direction. So this is a spherical world. We'll put water inside that world, and then we'll have little oases on the edge of the world that you have to get between. And it's dangerous to swim across that water. You don't always make it. When you show up, you're breathless. And so you're trying to communicate something that the island has no idea what you're talking about. And so, like, if the island is warm and sunny and has women wearing bikinis, and you come over and be like, everybody over there works at a McDonald's. You're like, work? We just eat coconuts off of trees around here. What are you talking about? And so, like, this is what you're explaining, is in every direction, it's uncomfortable to try to do these jobs. And it's always surprising to me. So USAID and state also, there's a political bent, and that shouldn't be. And it's theoretically possible to do psych profiling and say, we want people like this. We need people that are passionate, people that are willing to go do dangerous things, people that can behave in a big room full of very important people so they don't screw it up. There's a lot of requirements on these jobs, but you can test for that. You do need some amount of groupthink in these organizations so you can go in one direction. This is the diversity unity problem, right? You can't just have one or the other. You can't just have a room full of mavericks, but can you search for people instead of letting the self-select? Can you organizationally select people and then allow them to go out and do these things that are hard, fraught with errors, full of bad news? I'm not describing an easy problem to solve, so I don't know if it is solvable. But when you have ideologues working and their activism is overriding what the goal of the mission is, and the only thing they can do is report, it's impossible for an activist to fail. They never give up. They want a zero, the result of suicide for veterans. It has to be zero. Like, that is not a possible goal.
Yep.
Get it down to 18%. Get it down to 7%. Walk it down until you reach a point of no return or no significant gain possible. That's not how they think. And so when you say, hey, your design of teaching women how to weave so you can free them is failing, they can't at all hear that message when you show up on their beach. You're like, hey, that women's stuff, you're getting women beat up. Impossible. I would never,
Yeah, or they're going to say, oh, well, they shouldn't be doing that then. They shouldn't be beating the women up. And it's like, great, should is awesome, but it's not describing reality. And I think oftentimes you get people who kind of live in their own fantasy world of what the world is actually like. Obviously, we talk about different strains in international relations. You have realism and things like that. But when it comes to our State Department, USAID especially, you get people who are starry-eyed idealists a lot of the time, and they're saying, "Hey, we need to do this right now, or it's going to be the end of the world." And we think in really short-term ways, and that can be positive sometimes. You get some gains because of that. But, it's not good when you're doing long-term national policy. I mean, you look at adversary nations, right? You have Russia invaded Ukraine in 2014. Then they did it again in 2022 to a much greater extent, obviously. But, this was something that Putin's been thinking about for decades. This is not something that he just rolled out of bed and decided, hey, we're going to do this. It takes a lot of time, mobilization, buy-in from his underlings. Even in dictatorship, you need to have some sort of broader buy-in. Same thing applies to China and Iran, for example, right? These are countries that have very long time horizons, and they're willing to operate on those slowly but surely. And unfortunately, we have a very, very short time horizon a lot of the time. And that, kind of bites us in the ass a lot of it, especially when it comes to fighting wars. Oftentimes you'll get adversaries who are basically saying, hey, we'll wait them out because we know people will get tired of it. Governments will change. And again, that's part of a democracy, right? But you kind of need to militate against that and counterbalance it in a way that doesn't leave you open for getting beaten up all around the world, basically.
Yeah, man. So many places to take that. But you're right. Our desire to do good things is a good thing. And it's a concept. I've not written about this professionally yet, but I've talked about it publicly quite a lot. I call it ethical saturation. When we try to do the right thing by our terms, every single time we find something that needs fixing, you can't reliably fix it. And you saturate yourself ethically so that the outcomes are no longer in your control because you're just putting so much effort. Everything's just getting wasted and spilled and flooded. So when we look at things like men raping boys, women getting battered, whatever it's going to be, helping a farmer out versus hurting a farmer, because we're always trying to make this correct decision and we don't take the time to specialize or gain the professional license to do these things, we have these horrible outcomes. And a good example of this is, in theory, you could build military or State Department assets to go out and engage women. This is, again, is an area where I'm professionally published. The practice is that commanders have an ethos. They have 100 points of preparation that you can do before you deploy. And they run out of 100. Like they fill that thing up before they ever get to the non-lethal stuff because they have to keep people alive. And so you could say, yeah, we're going to forward deploy you because I'm obliged to, women, but I'm not going to give it interest. I'm not going to give it resources. And it's just going to be you go out and do it. And this is now an ill-principled thing because there's no buy-in from the commander. The commander's not specifically trained on how to do this. The people there are qualified simply by being women. That's it. And you have this belief that half-assed approach is going to not cause more harm, right? And I'm using women as an example, but any effort that we do has the same level of cavalier approach to it. And again, with no accountability, no third-party watchdog. Like what government, like here in California, we have refineries and they have to self-report all their own mistakes and there's watchdogs all over their ass trying to make sure that they oblige, right? And they still sometimes run afoul of the law. Well, where's that same level of hawkishness in terms of watching over the State Department? We don't have it. And so people are ill-principled as a norm. They're arrogant as a norm because there is no accountability for them being wrong. Their idea is right. Their emotion is right. And so, of course, their day-to-day actions are right. But in reality, when you have those 100 actions you can do before you deploy or while you're deployed, and one of them is hanging a flag in someone's at someone's diplomacy center, whether it's a consulate or the actual, the center for it, that's a wasted opportunity. You could have gone into town and met an elder and talked to them and listened to them and helped them understand how they saw the future of women in their country, and learned that and use that, even if you're going to leave, as a starting point. Here's how they see women going forward. Here are some of the elders that I saw that deal with women issues, and they're open to talking about it. This one's very negative about it. This one's very positive about it. In the middle, there's a bunch of other dudes. Just mapping that and understanding that would be much better than saying, I know what to do. Everybody gets a cow and a milker, and they're all going to make cheese.
Yep. Yeah. No, it's two things: letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? It's basically, instead of taking these incremental steps to moving in the right direction, it just needs to be fixed all of a sudden, right? And like you said, it's the lack of interest in knowledge on the ground. Not only just the lack of knowledge, right? Because you can be interested in getting knowledge on the ground and have problems with that, obviously, with how you collect that knowledge. But there's no interest in doing that. And I think that's really the cardinal sin right now of state and USAID, is that they don't seem to be interested in how their actions impact the, you don't want to say subject populations, but the populations they're working with, and how those actually work to advance our interests. Because if you're going out there and saying, hey, women need to be treated properly, great. That's good. Most people can agree on that. But if you're going in and doing that, and in the process, you're leading to women being treated worse, and you're alienating the people that you're supposed to be, being friends with, that's a problem. And that's going to cause, it's very easy to destroy credibility. It's very hard to build it up. That's one of those things that takes a very long time, but it's very, very fast to undo all that work. And we're not good at the building part. We're very good at the undoing part.
Yeah. We're good at the funding part too.
Yeah, no,
just
exactly.
taking what you're saying and adding to that, and putting on top of the layer, a layer on top of what I just talked about too, with that principled behavior. Some problems are not solvable in the time frame, with the resources, with the licensing and experience that we have. So I have this lady whose work I'd read. She was an ethnographer. She studied in Pashtunistan, and so she understands the Pashtun world well, and the women especially well, because she's a woman and she was able to insert in a place where we couldn't do that. And she inculcated, right? And so this is a full, in-depth ethnography, something we should all have a command of if we're going to go to Afghanistan. Almost zero people have read her work. It's shocking, right? And you shouldn't just read her work. You should read a bunch of ethnography so you understand these people better. But we don't bother with that. We'd rather read Sun Tzu, who may or may not even have existed. This woman you could talk to today live. Pay this woman to teach you. So I asked her, I'm like, can we develop the professional capacity within the military to engage women reliably in a place like, the Pashtun lands? And, how long would it take? And she says, no, you cannot. And I'm like, no, I mean, come on, where's America? We can find something new. We can figure out some kind of course program, a professional thing. Make it hard. Make it take 2 years. So, Pete, you cannot build that machine. It's unreliable, and that's the reliable and repeatable part of the scientific method that we refuse to apply to ourselves. And so it's fine to, reject what Benedict de Grima says, even though she's got a professional license to say it, and build a machine in spite of her that does work. Okay, that's fine. But understand what the standard is. You cannot do it. Now, in defiance of that, how are you going to build this machine? Well, we're just going to show up.
Yeah. It's one of those things where we're very good at planning some things. And then when it comes to the things that we're supposed to be planning, we're not very good at that. Or we decide not to, and trying to take in all that information. And again, it comes back to the humility, right? A lot of these folks don't have that level of humility. And when you're working in something like foreign policy, that's crucial, because you need to understand the people that you're working with, not just Americans, and not just one small subset of Americans that, go to the same cocktail parties, right? That's only one thing. And it's funny when you look at, modern domestic politics, you see these same folks don't understand even their own countrymen half the time. And good luck understanding people in a specific region of sub-Saharan Africa. Then, you might be able to speak their language just fine because you learned it at school, but you can speak the language just fine. And it doesn't mean you actually understand the people. And I think we could do a lot better at trying to be more understanding of different cultures and different people, And I'm perfectly happy with saying that I think American culture, Western civilization, is the best that we've been able to develop so far as humans. But that doesn't mean that you don't understand the people that don't necessarily buy that. You can advocate for your values, but there's a difference between advocating your values and imposing them. And we do way more of the imposing, and it ends up alienating large groups of people. Even in Europe, for example, right? Pushing a lot of the progressive messaging that we do, especially when it comes to racial politics, right?
Yeah.
It's totally different in Europe. I mean, just look at the way France deals with race. I mean, they have a lot of problems, don't get me wrong, in terms of, religious, all that kind of stuff, but they don't tally racial metrics in their government. They never have, ever. And it's one of those things where when you try to take an American understanding of that issue, which is a very unique thing in the United States, and you try to apply that everywhere else universally, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, you're black. Of course you're oppressed.
Yeah. Right. It's so fascinating.
I know. Well, this is a fact. It's not going to change. Gene Simmons is an Asian. Lisa Ling is not.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's just a fact, and we can't accept that reality.
Yeah, but just these basic classifications that are so overbroad, right? You get AAPI. Right. That's like half the world. I mean, even South Asia, right? South Asians, right? Pakistanis and Indians are extremely different from one another.
Completely.
They're not big fans of one another most of the time. Even if you look at Latin America, same thing. Hondurans and Guatemalans don't necessarily get on. And so it's really kind of flabbergasting that people, think, oh, this group of people looks like this, therefore they must think like this. It's like, no, not at all. We don't all think the same. Even if you look exactly, so you have the same background, you can be brother and sister and you don't think the same. So it's one of those things where when you try to lump people in and you don't kind of take into account those differences or even the ability for there to be differences, you make tons of mistakes.
Tons of mistakes. I mean, and there's a great way to explain this. There's this great episode. It's wonderful, of King of the Hill, when Hank Hill goes to his neighbor and is like, "Are you Chinese or are you Japanese?" He's like, "We are the ocean." So are you Chinese or are you Japanese? And that's how we do like the white, black, other category.
Yep.
How fucked up is it
to
tell someone they're in the other category? A Bedouin is nothing like a Japanese guy. They're completely different worlds culturally, right? They're still humans. They still love their kids. They still don't want to get cancer. But to lump all of these people in one category and say this is how you're abused, it's not a good recipe to understand, folks. I want to say one more thing, and then I'm really going to turn this thing over to you and let you figure out what else you want to talk about. When we talk about the 100 things that we get to do when we deploy, or like, oh, I got to go do my tour in Africa, or whatever it is, if you skip the hanging the flag step and you just go into town and you ask someone of influence, once you find that person, and you build trust with that person, it takes time to do all these things. You say, like, this is what I did a lot. What's the smallest problem that we should just be able to solve today, but you guys can't seem to get it figured out with us? Mm-hmm. And when they like electricity, you're like, that's a big problem. Smallest, like what's something today or tomorrow that I can help you solve so we can see if we can get your government, you and me, and find the answer. And they have things. So like, what would be awesome? If you could flatten that speed bump, if you could make this school crossing here safer, because people drive by there all the time, and you guys don't know because we all live in a junkyard, right? And if you could do that and reliably get wins where you welded the things that you wanted together, even if it's a little bit performative, you can get there faster. That's more valuable than hanging a fucking flag in the air. And I'll tell you what a flag looks like. So we're in Afghanistan, and we're trying to figure out the distance between the people and the government. People in the government, what's the distance? And so we're like, hey, Mike, what's the distance? Like, what has the governor over there done for you? You kind of point in direction towards the government center. What are you talking about? The government. What are you talking about? It's like some farmer doesn't even know. And you're like, the guy who's over there where the flag is, the Afghan flag. Oh, is that the Afghan flag? That guy, Rudy? He bought a goat for me and didn't pay for it. Well, that goes in the fucking book, because we're not asking him, about how close are you to the government? Oh, I'm very close. Is that the good answer? Is that the good answer? We're
Mm-hmm.
very close around here. You don't ask like that. You find a conversational way to find out that, hey, there's a big gap between. They doesn't even recognize his own flag, even if he knows what it is and he's putting me on. He's not willing to say that's my flag,
Yeah.
right? And that's a distance that when you brief that, we lose our minds because we love a fucking flag for whatever reason, and they couldn't give two shits about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just a misunderstanding of the people, and you made a really good point about taking those small wins. It's one of those things where that's not sexy, right? You don't write back home and say, "Hey, I flattened out a speed bump today." You say, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
I fed all these people and saved their lives." But
Right.
the smaller things are what build trust. That's what allow you to actually work on those bigger problems down the line, and it allows you to get the buy-in from people on the ground, that's the key. The key, you can't just go in and just fix something, because if you don't actually tell the people how to do it, you don't work with them, you don't get that buy-in, it's not going to work in the long run. And that's what you should be going for, is something to work in the long run. And so those small victories, I mean, if we could reorient our international aid around that kind of stuff, I think we'd be much, much more effective. And we're good at that. We're good at building things, even though it takes forever in the US. When we cut out the red tape, we build good stuff. And that's one of those things where, hey, if we're in a foreign country, we may not have that red tape. We can remove some of that. We can just do what we're good at. And that gets that buy-in, that builds that trust. And that's how you get wins overseas. And it's not one of those things where, you're going to turn something around and make this country perfect tomorrow, because it's not how it's going to happen. These people are humans just like us. They have the same sort of small bore interests as we do. If you want to come in and fill the potholes on my street in a local government, right? Localism is great in the US. Those are the kind of people that, for the most part, impact your lives on a daily basis. So it doesn't really surprise me too much to hear that people in other countries can be really far from their government, because we are. Obviously, social media has changed a lot of that. National mass media has changed a lot of that in the West, but that's not the case in other countries. They don't necessarily always have, news that are telling them, "Hey, you live in somewhere in the middle of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. Do you know what's exactly happening in Kinshasa tomorrow?" No, you don't. You don't really care. It doesn't matter to you. But it's one of those things where if we can get to those on the ground places, work directly with the people and try to help them with the problems that actually impact their daily lives on a small basis, you build up, you keep building up, and then you get to that point where, hey, you can solve that electricity problem because you have everyone on the same page. They trust you, they believe in what you're doing, and they're willing to help.
Yeah. You write for the National Review. Obviously, that's a big deal. And I just put a link on X for anybody who's on X and wants to see that. Your work there is excellent. Nobody at the National Review is shitty. You might disagree with their ideas, that kind of thing. But it is a conservative place. So when we look at the big audience, we've got a lot of folks who are progressive, who are left, who are well-meaning liberals. It's a lot of great people. But how do you communicate with them? How do you show them that, hey, a little rationality, mix in some principle, don't make your vision so grand, make sure you have professional license, all these things we've been talking about. How do you convince them because look, they're not reading the National Review. That's just the bottom line. They'll read Mother Jones and they'll know Mother Jones is it's a little bit shaky, right? They even know that, but they're not going to read the National Review. How do you talk to them?
It's tough, honestly. That's one of those things in the modern media environment. It's so siloed, right? People have their own echo chambers that they want to be part of, and that's that. I do think something like social media opens up a ton of doors there, because first of all, I mean, unfortunately, you don't really have people reading long form content as much as they used to, just generally, regardless of what political side you're on. People aren't always going to sit down and even read 1,000-word article. So
Right.
something where you can distill it on social media, where you can be out there. And I think trying to find commonalities where you can, and trying to put things in a way that people who may have different baseline ideas from you, um, putting it in a way that they might be able to understand, might be able to fit in their worldview. I think that's really helpful. And I think recognizing where, hey, this is what I think, but it may not be 100% perfect. I think being open about that sort of thing, kind of having that humility like we've been talking about, I think that is, endearing is not the right word, but it opens you to a conversation. It shows that, hey, I'm not just going to say everyone who disagrees with me on issue X is stupid. People can have bad opinions about things. Totally fine. If you follow me on X, you'll see I tweet about that all the time.
Yeah.
But that's one of those things where hey, if you can find common ground with someone on an issue, if you can explain in a way that is relatively neutral, saying, hey, this is a good idea because of X, Y, and Z, and not necessarily saying this politician's bad because they disagree with it, but hey, here's why
Sure.
you should agree with it. Making that positive case. I think, unfortunately, you get a lot of the negative. People saying this is bad, that's bad. And that there's a big, big place for that. Don't get me wrong. I do a lot of that writing myself, but you got to make a positive case sometimes if you're trying to win adherence. And unfortunately, I think far too often in our politics and in punditry and stuff, you get people who are just saying, this is the right way, that's the wrong way. They're not trying to win adherence. They're not trying to persuade. And if anything, I try to do my work. I try to persuade people, hey, this is what I believe, and here's why. If you can understand that, great. Even if you disagree with me, I'm okay with that. But if you're willing to take that information in, maybe over time you'll understand more where someone else is coming from. And I think that goes both ways. I try to do that as much as I can, understanding where someone else might be coming from, even if I disagree, saying, hey, they're not necessarily just evil. They may just believe something different because they have different life experience, different backgrounds, different, important moral valences that they put on different issues. And if you can understand that and kind of be humble about that, then of course you can still disagree. But it's one of those things that I think allows you to reach different people, just by that attitude alone, versus kind of being so antagonistic all the time. And, again, like there's a place for that, but there's also a place for persuasion. And I think if you want to win people over, that's really what you got to do.
One of my tests for is someone culturally savvy is, are they comfortable accomplishing their goal on someone else's cultural path? That sounds easy, maybe, but I'm tell you something, that shit is uncomfortable. And
Yeah.
so if my path that will accomplish the goal, doesn't matter if it's fast or not, it's not a critical path. It's just, is this even achievable? If it is some hippy dippy, vegan, nose pierced path, that's my job to walk it and make sure that we go down it and measure it. Right.
Yep.
I mean, that's how this works. And if the path is a MAGA hatted, a gun toting, approach to this thing, and if that's the path, I'll be damned. You know what? That's the path. And
Yep.
if the path is something completely foreign to me and it's focused on religion, because most countries have a deep tie to religion and government. We don't have it and we ignore it, and it's to our detriment.
Yep.
Then that is the goddamn cap. You have to follow it where it goes. You're welcome to impel and compel as needed, but if that path is going to accomplish it, let's just get on that Shake's path. Let's get on that, whoever that person is. Let's find out what their path is. We can always get off of it. We can always get off of it and say, we're going to start again. But we're so precious with our own means that we can't handle it politically and we cannot handle it culturally. And that, again, that is to our detriment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's one of those things, hey, the destination's the goal here. If you take a pretty winding path to get there, okay, maybe it's not ideal, but you get there. And I think that's one of those things that we too often ignore, and we do it at our own peril.
Anything before we wrap up? Do you want to ask me any questions? Anything else at all?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's been great being on with you. I've enjoyed the chat. It's been fascinating, especially hearing your experiences from on the ground. So I'm always super interested in hearing that. I mean, my background is much more theoretical in this sort of stuff. So anytime I can pick the brain of someone who's been on the ground and kind of has that direct experience, I totally value that. So I appreciate all that information.
And I appreciate the other side of this thing too. I had a lot of ground experience, and it only started to really matter when I was able to add some theory to it. And so a lot of this stuff I discovered on my own wasn't discovered by me. I mean, I was there and I'm like, this is how this is. And someone would say, that's Weber. And I'm like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you got to go read Weber. You're behind there. And so I'd have to go read Weber. And you're like, God damn, Weber. Is there anybody watching? Weber is sort of the Adam Smith of the political science world.
Yep.
And he just writes these truths that you're just stuck with, if the state won't police itself, the people will. You get these random outcomes that a stable one kind of place doesn't like because you've got these free radicals keeping themselves safe. And boy, it's so Weber, right? Yeah. So anyhow, so I appreciate the link going back to the theory and the practical side. It's cool. All right, let me, everybody else, I think I've got one more show for you today, a triple header today, which is
There
pretty
you go.
rare, but I think you'll like that. I appreciate that. Make sure you go follow Mike. There's nationalpolicy.com. You guys know that. He's on X quite a bit. He definitely is very engaging. So if you have a question, you want to yell at him about something, that's where you go.
Love it.
And just in general, I appreciate you all being here. Mike, I'll say goodbye to you in a second off, Mike. We'll see you in this afternoon. I don't know, maybe like 3 hours. We'll do another one.